to the In the Huddle YouTube channel. Today we will talk about the number 31 ranked team in my preseason power rankings, the Miami Dolphins. If you didn't watch the last episode, make sure to watch it, as in last episode we discussed what I put into consideration while making my preseason power rankings, and that will help you in watching this episode. Now that we've discussed that, now let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins hired Brian Flores last offseason, and he led them to a 5-11 record. Despite this 5-11 record, he exceeded a lot of expectations. They started off the season very poor, as they started 1-7. They were able to put the pieces together as they went 4-4 in their last 8 games. And they beat some very talented teams that included New England and Philadelphia. And both of those teams were fighting for playoff seeding and spots. Now that we've talked about Brian Flores, let's talk about the players. I have the Dolphins ranking as number 29 ranked QB room, and the Dolphins are relying on Tua Tagovailoa. Tua was one of the best quarterbacks in all of college, and he has great accuracy, solid mobility, and one of his only weaknesses is when he breaks down in the red zone. He does have one major concern though, and that is his injuries. He's had his fair share of injuries in his career, and the Dolphins need to be careful with him. With a weak offensive line that we'll talk about later, Tua needs to be careful with the hits he's going to be taking this year. If Tua ends up starting week 5 or 6, which is much earlier than I think he should, he's going to get banged up a lot. Behind him, we have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who I think is a great backup and may start for almost the first half of the year. He was a great leader for the Dolphins last year, and was a big reason why they went 4-4 in their last 8 games. Behind them, they have Josh Rosen, who's never really had his fair opportunity to succeed. He started off his career in Arizona. They went 2-14 that year. They did very bad. They drafted his replacement, Kyler Murray. He gets traded to Miami. He starts the first 6 or 7 games, does very bad. They replace him with Fitzpatrick, who ends up leading the Dolphins to a solid record down the stretch. So it's unlikely Rosen gets another opportunity unless he goes to a team like Pittsburgh or someplace. But that rounds up the quarterback room. Now let's look about running back room. Despite the low ranking of 28th, I think the Dolphins have done a very good job in building the running back room. They've put a low amount of assets, and this running back room is probably going to be similar production-wise to like the number 15th room. They traded for Matt Breida from San Francisco, and he's more of a big play threat running back. He's going to break off for big chunks for them. Behind him, they have Jordan Howard, who's more of a power back. Put him in on 3rd and short, 4th and short if they're going for it. You have Patrick Laird, who's a great 3rd down back, scat back. He played quite a bit for them last year. Don't think he's going to get as many touches this year. Behind him, you have Kalen Ballage. He's had a bad offensive line almost his whole career. He's never really gotten an opportunity to get it going. And with the addition of Jordan Howard and Matt Breida, it's unlikely he gets a solid amount of touches this year. Now let's look at the wide receiver / tight end room. I have it ranking 29, and this room can exceed that ranking by quite a bit, depending on if they can reach their potential. They have Devontae Parker, who had his breakout year last year. He got an extension, and he finally showed he was worth that first round selection. He has a great combination of speed and size, and he can be your number 1 wide receiver. Behind him, we have Preston Williams, who's a great physical wide receiver. He had off-field issues in college, which is why he slipped in the draft. And he had a nice start to the year last year. He did have an injury that sidelined him for the rest of the season, but if he lives up to his potential, him and Parker will be a great wide receiver duo. They have Albert Wilson, who's a solid slot wide receiver. His time in Miami might be coming to an end soon. They have Allen Hurns, who's a solid depth outside wide receiver. Jakeem Grant, who's a speedster, more of a special teams threat, but they did try to get him more involved in the offense, which I think is a good idea since speed is so important now in the NFL. They have Isaiah Ford, who's solid depth, and Malcolm Perry, who was a converted quarterback, and he could be their slot wide receiver. Let's look at their tight ends. You have Mike Gesicki, and Gesicki is extremely athletic. He has a lot of potential, and when he was picked in the second round a few years ago, he was a developmental pick. And I think he's on pace to be a solid tight end. Behind him, we have Durham Smythe, and he's a bigger bodied backup. He's nice depth for them. And if Chandler Cox, who's more of a tight end fullback type player for them. That about wraps up their receiver room. Now, this is where it gets bad. Their offensive line. I have them ranking dead last as the number 32 offensive line group. It's led by Austin Jackson, who they took way too early for my liking. He was a developmental tackle. He needs some work done, and he can't start day one and be a great player for you. Hopefully he can develop and he won't be a bust. But as long as the Dolphins don't have too high expectations, I think he can be good for them. They have Julian Davenport behind him, who they got from the Laramie Tunsil trade. They have Eric Flowers, who is a decent starter, but he got massively overpaid from the Redskins last year. He was good for Washington, but even they didn't re-sign him for how much he wanted, and I just think $10 million is way too much for him. That's an overpay. They have Michael Dieter behind him. He was a third-round pick last year. He's going to need to develop a little more before he becomes something special. They have Solomon Kindley. He is a fourth-round pick. He's going to compete for a starting job. They have Ted Karras, who was a backup in New England last year, and I think he can be a solid bottom-end starter for them. They have Keaton Sutherland, who's below average depth. They have Shaq Calhoun, who played last year. He played around 10 games. He wasn't that great. They have Danny Isidora. He was below average, decent depth. Right tackle, they have Robert Hunt, who they drafted in the second or third round this year. He's more physical, and I think he projects better at guard than he does at tackle, but we'll see where he plays. And we also have Jesse Davis, who's competing for the starting job. It's not a great offensive line room. We need to put a lot more work into it before it becomes anything special. Or before it even becomes, league average. This is the worst it gets, though, and this is a big reason why I think Tua should not play. This offensive line is just going to get blown up by teams. Teams with great pass rushes are going to have a day against this Dolphins offensive line. Now that we move on to the defense, let's first talk about the interior defensive linemen. We have Devon Godshaw, who's a great starter for them, solid run defender. They selected Christian Wilkins in the first round last year out of Clemson. He's a physical run defender. I don't think he's going to become the superstar many hoped he'd become, but he can be a solid starter for them. We took Raekwon Davis, who's out of Alabama. He's a great run defender, but he couldn't really get to the quarterback that well. We have Avery Moss, who's decent depth. We also have Jason Strobridge, who was selected in the 5th round. He's also good against run, but he has issues getting to the passer. And I have him ranked as number 19th group. I think this is actually a really good run defense. Brian Flores, they run a similar defense to New England, and those defenses are always good against the run. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's a top 10 run defense, yardage-wise, touchdowns. But this is where it gets bad. I had them ranking as the number 32 pass rush, as they paid Shaq Lawson and Emmanuel Ogbah, and they're both primarily run defenders. They're paying a lot of money to people whose best asset in their game is to stop the run. They're going to have issues getting to the quarterback, as Shaq Lawson, their best pass rusher, is around an average number 2. They drafted Curtis Weaver, who plays similar to Van Noy. He's explosive off the edge, but he plays more of an outside linebacker role, and he's not that power rusher that can give you lots of pressure. They have Vince Beagle, who's a solid speed rusher. He's also a good cover linebacker, so that's good for them. They also have Kyle Van Noy. I have him asterisk as he's not really a good pass rusher, and he's never done that, but in his role in Miami, he might be expected to do more of that. He's a better cover linebacker for Miami. And Talking about cover linebackers, I have them ranking as the number 13th group linebacking-wise. Raekwon McMillan and Jerome Baker are a great duo. McMillan is more of a bigger linebacker, better at tackling, thumper. And they have Jerome Baker, who's more of a cover linebacker, can stick with tight ends and running backs. And that's a great linebacking room for the Dolphins, leading the way. They also have Kyle Van Noy, who's a good addition for them from New England. They have Landon Roberts and Camus Grugier-Hill. They're both similar to McMillan and Baker, as Landon Roberts is more of that thumper like McMillan, and Grugier-Hill is more of that pass cover linebacker like Jerome Baker. They have Andrew Van Ginkel, who's a good outside linebacker for them, but he didn't get that many snaps last year, and it's unlikely he does this year, as they got quite a few players in this linebacker room that can be a solid rotation. Now let's move on to the best part of this Dolphins team, their cornerbacks. They have Byron Jones, Xavier Howard as their number 1 and 2 corners, and I think they're both quality number 1 corners. Jones was a great signing, and this will be a secondary you need to watch out for. Xavier Howard led the league in picks 2 seasons ago. As long as his pass rush can be average, which I don't know if it can be, this secondary is going to have good games. They drafted Noah Igbenogany late in the first round. He should play slot corner for them. He's going to be competing with Nick Needham for the slot corner job, and Needham was starting in that role last year, but I feel Igbenogany can take it away from him in a sense. Then we have Tay Hayes. He's decent, I guess, decent depth for them, but their safeties aren't as good, as I have them ranking 28th. Bobby McCain is solid. He was pretty good last year. We have Eric Rowe, he was pretty good as a strong safety, and he got an extension from them. We have Adrian Colbert, who's solid depth. And we also have Brandon Jones, who was a good tackling strong safety, who they drafted in the 3rd round. I think he went a little earlier than I expected him to. Probably expected to take an O-lineman at that point, but he's a good selection, similar to a Patrick Chung. And now let's look at the Dolphins' schedule. The Dolphins do not have an easy schedule like they did last year. That's one of the reasons why they went 5-11. They start off a year in New England. I don't have them winning week 1 in Foxborough. I feel Stidham can get the win there. Under-experienced Dolphins team. Then we host the Bills. I think this is winnable, but I just think Buffalo's the better team. And if Buffalo's pass rush can get to the quarterback, it's going to be a tough day for them. I have them losing in Jacksonville, and this game I think is a coin toss either way. Really depends on how good Minshew does. He's inconsistent sometimes. And I have an upset win here, week 4, beating Seattle at home. Many people will be like, you have them losing against Jacksonville but beating Seattle? I think this is a trap game for the Dolphins, and they match up pretty well against Seattle. Their pass rush is probably better than Seattle's O-line, and if they can get to the quarterback, their secondary can do very well. Seattle also does not have a strong defensive line, so that should help Miami, as that should give Fitzpatrick or Tua more time in the pocket to find their weapons. Then they play the 49ers and Broncos on the road. Those are 2 losses for me. Then they host the 2 LA teams, and they could get a win in one of those 2. It will be very surprising if they win both of them. I just think the Chargers and Rams are so much better pass rushing wise. I just think Joey Bosa, Melvin Gordon, that Chargers pass rush is just going to destroy the Dolphins, and Aaron Donald's going to have a great game against the Dolphins. Then they go to Arizona to play the Cardinals. I think this is a winnable game for them. Just depends how good the Cardinals are doing at this point. Many people think they're a playoff team. I don't agree with that, but we'll talk about them when I get to them in the series. Then they play the Jets week 10 and 12. I just put 11 for 16. I don't put the bye because that will make it more confusing. They play the Jets at home. I I have them losing there. Then they have the bye week. Then I have them winning in New York. I think they split either way. Winning in Miami or losing in Miami, and winning in New York or losing. I don't think either team wins both. Then I have them beating Cincinnati at home. I think that's a winnable game. Then they play the Chiefs week 13 at home. I think Chiefs are just too strong for them. Then I have them beating the Patriots in Miami, which happens every year. It doesn't matter. Then they play the Raiders and Bills. Both of them are away games. I have them ending the year on 2 straight losses. I feel Raiders and Bills could be fighting for playoff spots, so the games are going to be more important to them. But this stretch from week 11 to 14, that's where they can get a lot of their wins, even from like week 7 to 14. If they win like one against the Chargers or Rams, they beat the Cardinals, that's 2 more wins. They could go 6-10. That's not bad for Miami. This team was kind of lucky in their schedule last year. Not the best 5-11 team ever. I do think they regress in a way record-wise this year. But the Dolphins are a team. 2020 is not going to be their year. But 2021, they're going to be a team to watch out for. I think that happens with a lot of teams that get a lot of hype. The hype arrives 1 year early. We saw this with the Browns, who I think will have a much better year this year. But that's my take on the Dolphins. Like the video, subscribe, and comment below if you agree with this rank, and have a great day.